Next, I'd like to invite Grant Jackson from the Oregon Department of Agriculture to come talk a little bit about guidelines in Oregon.
Good evening, y'all. Is this working? Yeah, it is. All right, so I'm coming to you from Salem, up north there, and I work in the registration and outreach part of the department of the pesticides program. So I do, this is a sliver of what I do. I basically look at labels that registrants or companies that make pesticides, and they want to sell them in Oregon. I look at them with a team of 2 other people, and we determine based on Oregon state law, which you have hopefully all voted or been part of the process. We look at our laws and we determine if they're able to be sold in the state. So when it comes to cannabis, we are looking at those labels too, and we're determining if they can be on the cannabis guidance list. Anybody in here familiar with the cannabis guidance list? A couple people. Do you use it at all? Do you look at it? Okay. Let me get going on what that actually is and what it means. Oh, wrong way. Right way. All right, so Oregon, your Oregon State Legislature 2 years ago, actually in 2015, the 2015 session, they declared cannabis to be an agricultural commodity, just like anything else agriculture. Blueberries, strawberries, corn, wheat, all of that stuff. So it is on par with those commodities now. So we regulate it, is what that means. Oh, too fast. So, like I was saying, we regulate it. It falls under the jurisdiction of our department, not just pesticides, but also weights and measures, food safety, water quality, which is going to be a huge issue here with hydroponic grows and that sort of thing. Just like a dairy farm, that there's some water quality issues surrounding dairy farms. There are water quality issues surrounding agriculture in general. So we're regulating these things, weights and measures, obviously. With the food safety licenses, if you wanna make edibles, you have to go through our department to get a license to do that. So it's falling under the umbrella of our regulation. And for the people that were here for the trivia earlier at the beginning of tonight's episode, she was talking about Erica was talking about pesticides. What is a pesticide? So, and she gave a very valid definition taken right out of FIFRA, which is federal law, Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act of 1947. Anything that controls anything is a pesticide. For anything that has a pesticidal claim that it kills something or controls something is a pesticide. Whether it's a nematode, an insect, repellents that you use to go DEET, to go into the mountains, like you go up in the Cascade Crest right now, you're going to need some of that. Rodenticides, fumigants, all of that stuff. Plant growth regulators, not all of them, but some of them. So preventing, destroying, repelling, or mitigating a pest. And you'd be surprised, most of the people in this room probably know that, but I get calls from growers a lot and other people that are doing other things, and they don't think certain things are pesticides, but they are. It's a common misconception. So we're regulating pesticides under ORS 634, and we have a cooperative agreement with EPA under federal law called FIFRA, like I just said. And what that basically means is that we have to follow what they say in terms of pesticide regulation. For the most part, we can make it more stringent, but we at least have to uphold the tenets of FIFRA. So FIFRA, among other things, the Federal Code of Federal Register is where you can find it. If you really want to fall asleep quite easily at night, you can go online and find it there. Registers pesticides for use in the United States. So any pesticide that is used in the United States, with the exception of being a 25B product, which has been declared safer by the EPA, the ingredients in that product have to be registered as a Section 3 with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. So they evaluate new pesticides and uses. So some of the pesticides on our cannabis guidance list are Section 3 pesticides that have been evaluated by the registration review team at EPA. And it's quite a lengthy process that companies that manufacture the pesticides that want to be on, that want to sell pesticides in the United States, they have to pay millions of dollars to get them tested and conduct their own tests in order to meet the standards to be sold here in the United States. So registered pesticide producing establishments. So the Dow Chemical Company want to make a pesticide in the United States, they have to register with the EPA and enforce pesticide requirements. They have a criminal investigation division that enforces pesticide regulations in the United States, and our ODA works with them from time to time when issues come up in the state of Oregon. And then something that I'm involved in a lot is special local need registrations, and not necessarily emergency situations, but special local needs. We have a lot of seed crops in Oregon, especially in eastern Oregon. We grow a lot of alfalfa seed, carrot seed, a lot of stuff like that, that when the label first came out of a big company, it didn't have a particular use site on it, like carrot seed. So we work with the registrants and we work with growers to get that use added onto the label so that they can produce their commodity. So there's a lot going on with registration. When I first heard about registration years ago, I was like, that sounds pretty simple, but it's a calculus for sure. So our jurisdiction in terms of FIFRA compliance and monitoring for the EPA, we do inspections. I'm not an investigator, but I work with investigators. And then, of course, what I just mentioned before, registration and regulation. That's kind of what I'm involved with. And investigators and registration specialists, we kind of work together to get things done under ORS 634, which is state law. All right, so the Pesticide Control Act, that's 634, sale, use, and distribution, licensing and recertification for people that want to apply pesticides for hire, and also a category of pesticides called restricted use pesticides, which are particularly toxic. They have to be licensed to use those. And hopefully there's nobody using RUPs on cannabis. There aren't any restricted use pesticides on the cannabis guidance list, and I'll get into that list in a minute here. But and then routine compliance monitoring of dealers, pesticide dealers, structural pest control operators, people with private pest control licenses. Our investigators go around and look into, let me see your records, are you doing things the right way? And then pesticide use investigations, we get a lot of complaints called in, whether it's in a forestry setting, a field setting. One of the big issues right now is vineyards. Grapes are particularly susceptible to a pesticide called 2,4-D, which is an herbicide. So it volatilizes, it goes into the air, the molecules can land on grapes, and they can easily kill the grape plant or distort it. So it's a big deal, and the 2,4-D is used on grass seed operations because 2,4-D does not kill monocots or grasses. So if you're a cannabis grower and you're wondering what you can use in Oregon, first of all, under FIFRA and in the federal realm, is there any pesticide that is legal to use on cannabis? Does anybody know the answer to that question? No, it is still considered a Schedule I drug, and so there is no, in the eyes of the EPA and the federal government, there is no legal pesticide. So, but in the ongoing battle of states' rights versus federalism, states do have the unique opportunity for referendum. And in this state, in 2014, the people of Oregon said, no, we want cannabis to be legal by a majority. So it wasn't a super majority, but it was pretty crushing. Anyway, so along with Washington, Alaska, Colorado, and the District of Columbia now, and I saw today that California's ballot measure was approved. So, yeah, that's a big deal too. So, anyway, the states, Washington, Colorado, those guys had it legal a couple of years ago, and they knew that people were going to be using pesticides on their crops, right? You can't. There's no two ways around it. The federal government could say no pesticides legal. So they came up with certain pesticides that they thought were okay to use on cannabis. And Oregon looked at what they had done, and they worked with some scientists and some other professionals in the pesticide arena and in the human health arena and then the liquor licensing arena, and they came up with the Cannabis Guidance List. So there are 3 criteria that pesticide companies, when they want to be able to sell their pesticide in Oregon to be used on cannabis, they have to meet 3 criteria when we examine their labels, okay? The first of which is that the active ingredient, that is the substance or the compound within that pesticide that does the killing or does the mitigation, if you will, is exempt from the requirement of a tolerance on all food crops, all right? So what, in the conventional sense of thinking with a pesticide, when you eat your corn on the cob or when you, whatever vegetable or whatever commodity you're eating, whether it be wheat or anything else, most of it has a pesticide. Pesticides have been used on it at some point in time, whether it's organic pesticide, OMRI certified, or conventional. And what the EPA, together with the Food and Drug Administration, have done is come up with residue tolerances for use of pesticide on food crops. And it's a threshold that's been established based on a whole host of factors, okay, that determines how much of a residue can be left on that commodity when it gets into the processing stage, when it gets into consumption, human consumption, okay? And so they've determined tolerances for virtually every compound, okay? And if the EPA and the FDA have considered a compound to be exempt from a tolerance, it means that they think it's so innocuous that it does not require a tolerance, okay? And so all of the compounds on the pesticide cannabis guidance list here in Oregon, the first and foremost, it's kind of like the linchpin of being on that list, has to be exempt from a requirement of a tolerance on food crops, all right? Right out of the gate, exempt from a requirement of a tolerance on all food crops. So that eliminates a whole host of mostly conventional pesticides, but also some organic, OMRI certified pesticides, okay? Secondly, the product, right here, the product label includes directions for use on. All right, so it has to have label language on it that is broad enough to include crops like cannabis. So unspecified food crops, it could say potatoes, tomatoes, peppers, onions, and other such crops. I've seen labels like that. It could say unspecified home garden plants, unspecified herbs, and unspecified plants or crops. It just has to be broad enough, the label language, to include cannabis. Because, like I said earlier, it's not legal in the eyes of the federal government, all right? And then if it did not fail a pyrolysis test, that means it was combusted, and they tested for analytes within the smoke, and it passed that test. So a lot of that type of testing is few and far between. There's been some compounds that are used on tobacco, I understand, that have been tested that way, but it doesn't really happen with the whole universe of pesticides. So those are the 3 criteria that we look at to get labels on the list, the cannabis guidance list, and we it's about 309 right now, I think the count is, of products that are actually on that list. It can be found on our website. Pyrethrins are on there. So there's some efficacious, effective pesticides on the list. Azadirachtin, insecticidal soaps, oils, a lot of the BTK stuff, a lot of the streptomyces, the bioagents that Erica was talking about at the outset of this program. A lot of those guys are on the list. So these are the criteria that we're going off. It's kind of a weird place to be in when something is federally illegal, but the states see it another way. It's kind of for me, kind of a history buff kind of guy. These states' rights issues were going on. They've been going on for hundreds of years, and this is just another one. So guide list versus testing rules. So the OHA, the Oregon Health Authority, has developed some testing rules for analytes. That is substances derived from pesticides that can be detected on flowers and in concentrates after they've been applied. All right? So the legislature said, you got to do this. All right? This is a human health thing. And I guess there's just been a lot of confusion as to whether the action levels that have been developed to test for these analytes are tolerances. And from ODA's perspective, they are not tolerances. They've just been established by labs, by the OHA, working with labs in conjunction with people that run labs to help detect some of the compounds in the commodity. So the list is right here. You obviously can't see it unless you have excellent vision. But I had a copy of it at work, and I forgot to bring it down here, but it's all public record. OHA analyte testing guidelines, and you can contact me, and I can get a hold of you if you're really curious about what's on that list. So from ODA's perspective, if they test your product for any of the things on this list, and they find it at any level, it could be a problem. The action levels have been established by labs for detection purposes. It's called level of quantification, all right? And I'm sure you have a lot of questions. It didn't come easy for me to try to understand the difference between the two, and I think, to be quite honest with you, it's still being ironed out from a regulatory standpoint. I think these things are still being ironed out. This is only, 1 year into things being legally sold, and things are being ironed out. And I know that a lot of folks that are making decisions in my agency are happy to be a part of the process, and I get calls from growers a lot of times. Every week I get probably like 8 or 9 calls at least on average from growers that want to be legal. They want to come out of the shadows, right, and be legal. And I want to tell folks on behalf of the agency that we're here to help. I'm here to help. From a personal standpoint, I supported the proposition. So if you have questions, my contact information is here. And I'm sure you do. I have questions. So anyway, so just to reiterate it one more time here, action levels are not tolerances. There aren't any tolerances on cannabis, okay, for pesticide residue. There aren't any tolerances, not from the ODA perspective, okay? Here are some contacts. I'll give you my number if you want to jot it down. This is just the main line here up top here. My number, Grant Jackson, 503-986-4553. If I can't help you, I will find somebody that will. And I love helping people out. I think it's great. We have a cannabis policy coordinator. She's actually up in Portland tonight giving a similar presentation. Her name is Sunny Jones. She can be reached at 503-986-4565. And then there's a listserv. You get an automatic email every time something happens at the regulatory level. That is on the bottom here for regulatory cannabis information. So I don't know if there are growers in here. Good luck with your commodity, and I hope you have a plentiful harvest. And if there are interested citizens, then happy to answer any questions. So go right ahead.
Grant, thank you so much. I'm sure there's a ton of questions out here. Would you like to start?
Are there going to be different regulations later on for medical versus recreational, or no, as far as pesticides go?
The question, are there going to be different regulations for medical versus recreational on the horizon? Is that kind of what you're asking? I can't really speak to that. I'm not too sure. Just keep up on the news and keep up with the legislative updates. That's what I can tell you. I don't think they're exactly the same right now, but I'm not sure. I can't speak to that. Sorry about that.
Hi, Grant. Thanks for the presentation. I'm wondering if you could speak a few words about pyrethrin, again, natural pyrethrins, because again, as you mentioned, there are products that are on the approved list that, if I remember, there's still products on there that contain natural pyrethrins, and yet at the same time, on the OHA list, there is an action limit that's been established for natural pyrethrins. And so, from my perspective, this is kind of like what farmers face normally, which is you're allowed to use a compound, you just can't have it at above the final level, be above a certain level. But I'm curious to have you speak to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Sounds very contradictory. So there are pyrethrins on the action level list, and yet they are allowed on the guidance list. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not going to whitewash anything. That sounds like it needs further examination, euphemistically speaking. So pyrethrins, yeah, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. Good question, though. Yeah, definitely. It's part of the ironing out process, I would imagine. So, any other questions?
So you were talking about pesticides you can use. I just thought I'd point out that in Oregon, there are some specific rules about how people dispose of pesticides. So if people are ever, there may be some other stuff on how you get rid of material in your garden, water that's contaminated with pesticides. We have a very specific rule about how you can get rid of those and how you count them as like hazardous waste and that sort of thing. So I just thought I'd point that out.
Yeah, usually.
The end of that cycle.
So if the gentleman is correct. Disposal guidelines for pesticides can be found on the label. They're required to have disposal guidelines, and if you violate the disposal guidelines on the label, you're in violation of FIFRA and also ORS, Oregon Revised Statute. So.
Any form of a pesticide gets classified in there. I happen to be familiar with that from something else. And
do you know what part of ORS that is?
It's OAR 340-109.
So it's administrative rules. So there have been rules developed according to ORS. Mm-hmm. ORS comes first. That's legislative decree, and then it gets turned into administrative rule. I don't know which state agent. I don't know if that is under the purview of DEQ.
That is DEQ.
DEQ, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I mean, they have their own. It's probably depending on the size of a pesticide disposal.
So I think it tells you how you're supposed to treat it, which is pretty similar to the federal rules.
The label,
yeah. But if there's larger gardeners, they may end up, needing to look at counting it. But that's probably not the bigger deal. It's just making sure that you're handling your waste pesticides.
Yeah, absolutely.
Properly. There's a what is it? The Glenwood transfer station. They'll take all that stuff on certain days. So just make sure you get rid of your stuff properly. Even some of the organic ones may classify under that. So it might be good to look at that. I thought I'd bring it up.
That's important input, and along the same lines, along the educational lines, there's all sorts of. It's not willful ignorance. It's just people that don't know about. We were talking about IPM earlier. I think there's a lot of folks out there that are maybe getting into the agricultural aspect of cannabis, and maybe they don't have growing experience from maybe another crop or just horticultural experience in general. There's a whole host of educational things that need to be undertaken by both non-profits, NGOs, and government agencies in terms of worker protection standard. If you're using a federally or a pesticide and it has a agricultural use requirement box on it, then your cannabis grow, your employees are going to be covered under a federal statute known as worker protection standard. It's not a statute, it's a standard that's covered underneath FIFRA, which is a statute. So if you're using a Section 3 registered EPA pesticide that's on our guidance list, it has an EPA registration number, that's how you would know, and it has an agricultural use requirement box on it, then you're required to give your employees worker protection standard protection. And they just revised those statutes, EPA did, last year, and they're on the books now. All the changes start in 2017. So, the disposal guidelines that the gentleman over there is talking about, there's a whole host of stuff that needs to be considered, and it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, it's going to happen over a period of years, and the pyrethrin thing, that needs to be ironed out. So, OSHA they do regulate worker protection standards, so expect them to be knocking on your door. But thank you very much. Disposal information is usually on the label, and if you follow the label, it's pretty good practice to follow the label, and not only for disposal information, but also dosage rate and everything else is on there. So it's a legal document. So the gentleman over here had a question.
Well, I have one.
Oh, you had one first?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I was even shocked that people were using pesticides on cannabis when I first learned about it at the Environmental Law Conference. But I hope people become more educated about organic practices and such so that they don't even have to go that route. But my question is, I have another general question. Since hops is also in the cannabis family, is there similar pest and pathogen problems with that agricultural crop as well? And I know also that, for instance, in the Oregon Department of Forestry, and also in agriculture, there's a lot of cocktail mixes, mixing different chemicals like glyphosate and 2,4-D, et cetera, all these really nasty chemicals. I just wanted to ask you, how do they evaluate that and break that down as far as, I mean, there's all these synergistic effects that make it even stronger when they're mixed together, these chemicals.
Yeah, the hops question, I can't really speak to the hops question. I've grown them a couple of times. I don't really know what if they share the similar pests. I would imagine that would be a question for some of the more experienced growers in here. But in terms of the synergy of mixing certain herbicides, in the case of forestry, it's going to be herbicides. Those types of pesticides aren't on the cannabis guidance list, but it does bring up a really good point about mixing that stuff together, even the stuff that's on the guidance list. I don't know. That's part of the endeavor right there. I mean, to find out what that kind of stuff does when you mix it together. Being exempt from the requirement of a tolerance on food crops is a layer of protection for starters, but knowing what actually happens when you mix acidiractin with pyrethrins or any other stuff on that guidance list, there isn't any regulation other than what's on the labels of those products. So if they say try it in a compatibility jar test, or if it says do not mix with other pesticides, then it's all kind of label directives. You can't underestimate the importance of following the instructions on the label. Tell people that time and time again. Companies have invested money into putting these labels together. They're required to do that through FIFRA, and it's a very evaluative and deliberate process that folks have to go through and able to sell their stuff here. Well, in a forestry setting or any of the conventional agricultural settings, yeah, there are regulations for those. Companies will, like Dow or Syngenta or anybody that's putting out a chemical that's going to be used on a crop like that, they'll have information about synergistic effects. They'll have the data to back up mixing those things together for efficacy and for safety. But in terms of some of the products that are on the cannabis guidance list, that hasn't been established yet. So, and it might happen down the road, but it's a very good question. I mean, definitely one of the things to consider. So.
Grant, is that the same as like tank compatibility on the label, where it'll say tank compatible with other fertilizers?
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Yeah, well, not just fertilizer, but tank compatible with other pesticides. So I work with growers and they're putting certain herbicides you can definitely put together, and they have different characteristics that'll attack different parts of the pest, and they won't degrade the quality of the crop or human safety or health. So they've been tested under controlled situations. So are there any other questions?
We got one more over here.
This is pertaining to the Guardian product. Are you familiar with the Guardian product?
Sure. Yeah, that's something I forgot to mention. There are a lot of products out there that there are some that have been the deception held within those products, i.e., the compounds in those products that aren't declared on the label.
Yeah. So, if I'm not mistaken, the owners of the company inserted something that wasn't on.
Yeah.
the
So
label.
there was a company in Illinois, Guardian. I don't know if that was the name of the company. That was the name of the product.
I got exposed to it personally.
What's that?
Abamectin was the.
Yeah, they were
compound.
lacing it with
So I got some abamectin in me this year. As
Abamectin.
a medical patient, yeah. So I wondered if there's anything that happened from that to prevent that from happening again.
Yeah, there's definitely. Well, first of all, that case has been. It's been given to the EPA, Criminal Investigation Division, and they're going to follow up on it. But yeah, so detecting adulterated pesticides. There's labs are testing for it, and given the resources that we have, we're doing our best to vet out those perpetrators. Yeah, it's on the radar for sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, we got a guy calling today. The fertilizer registration team that I work with. So there's no federal oversight on fertilizers in the United States, which is like this huge loophole. Yeah, and so they tested. So Oregon, you'd be proud to know that Oregon has a outstanding fertilizer registration team of 3 people. They have a lab up in Portland where they test their products that they pull off the shelves. These guys on the registration team will go around and they'll take fertilizer products off the shelves, and so does our investigators for pesticides. But they'll send them to the lab, and if some of them make like these claims, okay, on the label, fertilizer label, and they'll say, yeah, this contains 10,000 colony forming units of it could be what's a popular one, like mycorrhizae or glomus, stuff that is purported to really help root development a lot of times, or to outcompete pests, right? But they won't make a pesticidal claim. But so a couple months ago, the registration team sent a bunch of fertilizers up to the Portland lab. They tested them against the claims, and then they sent the same products out to a independent lab. I think it was in Missouri, and they both labs came back with like well below what was claimed on the fertilizer labels, and it was really eye-opening. So we have people calling all the time now, like, hey, can you check this guy out? Or, it's like they're ratting on each other in a way. I don't know how much of it is like industrial espionage or like Slugworth trying to undermine Willy Wonka, but he wasn't really trying to undermine Willy Wonka at the end anyway. But anyway, so yeah, to answer your question, yeah. Go ahead. We got.
Okay. I just wanted to know, is Abbott still in your no-no list here in Oregon?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Abbott. I know a few years ago it was on your list or not.
No, it's not on the list. Avid is not on the list. That contains abamectin, and it hasn't been. It's not exempt from a tolerance, from a residue tolerance on food crops, so it didn't make the cut.
Well, I have definitely seen somebody go through some serious neurological problems after using Avid as a grower for 7 years, and it totally destroyed her nervous system, and she died from it, and several other people have. And then I heard that in Oregon you were not allowed to use Avid. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah, you're not technically allowed to use it.
Good,
I know that I worked in a greenhouse for 10 years, and I know I used it on ornamental greenhouse crops, and it worked, but not on cannabis. So, yeah, you're welcome.
Grant, I have one more question for you.
Yeah.
I wanted to chat a little bit about persistence rates as listed on labels.
Persistence on labels, okay.
Yeah, so of course my understanding is those persistence levels are set, and this may be more of an EPA question, but I'm curious what the dialogue is. So if those are tested under wind, rain, and sunlight, and I'm consulting an indoor gardener who wants to identify within a couple weeks of accuracy the persistence rate of a pesticide they're using.
Talking about half-lives?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, they're all tested. Be if it's on, there we go. If it's on the label for use in an indoor setting, I would imagine that it's been tested in those types of situations with those controls. But I'm not sure. I can't be quoted on that. So.
Do they delineate whether it's for indoor or outdoor use on a pesticide product?
Yeah, they will.
Okay.
All labels you can't use it if it doesn't have indoor. If you want to use it on an indoor crop, on a greenhouse crop, and it doesn't say that it's okay for use on a greenhouse crop, there's a reason. A, it hasn't been tested, or B, it has been tested, and probably B, it's been tested, and it didn't pass muster. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah, there's an incredible amount of testing that goes into Section 3 registrations. That is pesticides that aren't 25Bs, that the EPA, for 25Bs, they don't require federal registration because they think they're so innocuous. Most of it is stuff that we use in our kitchens every day. So that stuff aside, Section 3 is the stuff that we don't use in our kitchens, hopefully. A lot of testing goes into that. That's product development, just like your car, just like anything else that has to have consumer ratings and stuff human health ratings, it's tested. So, yeah, it's a good question though. Yeah, you got to read the label. Yeah, labels are legal documents, and once you get into, you can really get into the, no pun intended, weeds with labels. The way that you interpret them from a legal standpoint. If it says and or versus if it says or, that can be like a huge thing. And versus or. Who knew those 4 letters could be, those 2 words could be so profound. So anyway, I think people are starting to head for the exits, but anyway.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Hopefully I answered your questions and I didn't confuse you even more. That's my whole goal, is not to confuse you. Hopefully I didn't do that.
No, thank you for clearing up so many of our questions. And I have to share with all of you, Grant and Sunny have been so receptive, and I just appreciate their attention and their quick timelines. We're currently investigating certain products that we sell at our shop that we have great interest in getting on the guidelines list. So it's just incredible. This is what Cannabis Science Pub is all about for me. The networking, the bridge building, the coming together, and the educating ourselves. So I just wanted to give one last shout out to our sponsors today. Driftway Farm for the flowers, for the clone, for your presence today. Of course, for Cannabis LLC out in Springfield, Oregon's Herbal Remedies. And let's all sit with that humility sponsor for a little bit this summer as we all engage in our new endeavors. Thank you all for staying. I really appreciate your time tonight. Have a great one.